Kia ora, councillors. All right, we'll get underway with our final council meeting for 2024. This is the council meeting for the 19th of December, 2024. We will start with a KARAKIA.
Madam Chair, kia ora, councillors. Whakataka taho ki te uru, whakataka taho ki te tonga, ki makinakina ki uta, ki mataratara ki tai, e hi aka ana te arakura, he tio, he huka, hi ho hu, tihei, mauri ora.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chief Executive. Welcome, councillors, to our final council meeting for this year. We do have quite a few items on our agenda, including one item for public excluded. So we will try and work our way efficiently and effectively through this agenda as we work towards the close of 2024 for this council. All right, so we will note the health and safety statement. We do have some externals. Can I just get you, Dave, to just quickly take us through?
Kia ora tātou. Merry Christmas, everyone. Just a quick update for those who may not be aware. In the event of a fire or an emergency, please do follow the directions of staff. The nearest fire exit is through the main chamber door where I'm pointing now, out to the right onto the footpath and then across the marked pedestrian crossing assembling in the park. And for those of you that haven't been here before, bathrooms also out the door, just in the little to the left from there.
Got to thank you for that. All right. Apologies. We do have a full house today. So we have no apologies. In the chamber, we have Councillor Hodge, Smith, Clarkson, Dunbar, Smith, Strange, Kneebone, Downard, Cookson, Marr, Hughes, Nicol, and myself. Online, we have Councillor Graff and Councillor Mahuta. So no apologies. We'll move to confirmation of the agenda, noting the addendums that have been circulated. I have a mover, Councillor Smith, a second, and Councillor Clarkson. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Jennifer, I'm just going to note that your mic is right behind the Christmas tree, and I may struggle to see your light if that comes on later. All right, disclosures of interest. Any new disclosures of interest or disclosures in relation to items on the agenda for council today? Nope. Okay, so we will move to the confirmation or receipt of our minutes. We've first up got the council minutes from the 28th of November, 2024.
Sorry, Chair, excuse me. Did you
Yes.
have an apology? It's just that I need to take a leave for about half an hour at 10 o'clock.
At 10 o'clock.
Quarter past 10, about quarter past 10.
We're past
Okay.
10, sorry. Do we need to go back to the apologies then? And just to note. Brief absence, I guess. All right, so now I do need a mover and a second. Councillor Marr moved, Councillor Hughes second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so now we will go, did we do the minute one? Did I finish that one? No. All right, do I have a mover for confirmation of those minutes? Councillor Strange, a second, and Councillor Hughes. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now, our next selection of minutes to be either confirmed or received. Councillors can note on the screen the various meetings that these minutes relate to. I've got a mover and Councillor Strange, second and Councillor Nicol. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. We now have a recommendation from the Finance and Services Committee This came through from their, it's the 20th of November meeting. Is that correct? Yes, I'm reading that correctly. All right. Councillor Hughes, as the chair, would you like to move that recommendation? And second, and Councillor Strange. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We then have a recommendation from the Climate Action Committee from their 21 November meeting. Council supports the next steps and change in approach to meet the Regional Climate Action Risk Assessment Project objectives as set out in the Climate Action Committee agenda. Would you like to?
Yeah, happy to move. I mean, it's a rescoping and carrying on with a new, better approach.
Give it a second.
Right. So, okay, I've got a mover in Councillor Nicol and a second in Councillor Mahuta. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right. Last one, we've got a recommendation from the Regional Transport Committee that Council funds the Tokoroa and Tikawiti bus funding local share gap until July 2025 via the 25 year operational cost savings or the public transport reserves.
Question,
Have we, Councillor Smith?
where is the public transport reserve made up from?
Have I got Phil?
Any specific question in that?
Interest, if it's to Tokoroa and Tikawiti funding, and it's coming from the public transport reserve, is that from all TAs have contributed to that reserve, or is that a specific reserve from Tikawiti and Tokoroa?
The reserve is for all services across the region, so it isn't specifically for those districts that contribute to that service.
But the funding has, through you, Madam Chair, the funding has come from all districts into that reserve.
Correct.
So we're cross-subsidising already the public transport in the region. I appreciate it's minor, but I just want to know the precedent.
Same as ICM, councillor.
It's another issue.
I'm just reflecting on the recommendation that this council, sorry. I'm just reflecting on the recommendation that came through this council from the Future Proof Public Transport Committee, and that there was a motion at that time to consider that within the annual planning process. I'm just testing, is that an approach that is equally applicable under this recommendation? Or is this
This is for this financial year.
this is for this financial year? Would the chair or deputy chair of Regional Transport Committee like to speak to this?
I'm happy to move.
You move, okay, and do I have a second, and Councillor Hodge? All those in favor? Opposed?
All right.
Carried. That was an aye. Nice. Carried. All right, we'll now move to the health and safety report. So councillors, this is item 7.1. This is on page 79 of your agenda. And we have Stu Brown to join us. Page 79. Stu.
Morning. Morning, Madam Chair and councillors. I'll take the report as read this morning and take you to a few key points in the report. You'll see under section 1 with the national events, the Ports of Auckland outcome there with their chief executive being prosecuted has been a significant item in the media recently, and has had lots of discussion in many different businesses there. And I guess it's really important that we recognise the due diligence that's required and know what actually happens on the ground, as opposed to what the the SOP or the standard might say. It's actually the show me element that's quite important. And here at Waikato Regional Council, the health and safety walkarounds from the executive are strongly contributing positively to that. As we move through the report, you'll see under the health and safety walkarounds with the executive in the previous month, Chris completed 2 of those. We continue to have those as a focus at our executive meetings, and we're looking at how we can, incorporate our critical risks into those walkarounds with the staff. So they're going well. Our sick leave had another little bump up again to 6.1 that you'll see, which is again above the benchmark there in point 30. We're hoping that comes down as the summer comes around. And under EAP, we've talked about this a number of times, about our EAP service and the utilisation of that. You'll see in point 37 there, really just a point from the Ministry of Health around issues that are affecting people out in the population. Obviously, we take those people from the population and bring them into our employment here, so they come, with the impacts of things that are going on out there. You may have heard the term VUCA out in business, which is that volatile, uncertain, and complex, ambiguous world that we all live in now. So it's kind of important that we, keep this front of mind and ensure that we're doing everything possible to support our staff as they work with us. And that's what I have to cover today. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Marr.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Stu, I participated in the walk around in the Coromandel area just recently, a week ago, with our CE, Chris McClay, and just like to report back, really impressed with the health and safety work from the teams. We visited the maritime team, so their work and their health and safety briefing to us around the harbour, and then the wharf itself and on the boats. We actually went out on one of the boats on the vessel. So really impressed with that, and then our site visits to various sites around the Coromandel, really comprehensive briefings on health and safety, and vests and footwear and the whole, everything was covered. So and there was, we did move into some areas where there were contractors weren't working at the time but had a lot of machinery and equipment and stuff like that. So really impressed in that, and it's that education is obviously out there, and it's certainly well taken up. So thank you very much for you and your teams and the team in the Coromandel.
Brilliant, thank you.
Great feedback. Thanks for sharing that, Councillor Marr. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just an unusual one, inappropriate placement of koi nets. Do you want to explain what that was about and how it relates to a member of the public and not our staff?
Yes, our staff were out conducting their normal work, and they observed someone in koi nets across the river that wasn't authorised, and they just asked that those be removed. So that's what that relates to.
Any other question? Councillor Cookson.
Yeah, I'd just like to back up what Councillor Marr just said. I've been doing a governance course in Auckland, and our last case study was what happened at White Island. And as governors, our responsibility of what took place, or not what White Island, and going through our health and safety systems, I was quite able to use what we do here in my governance course of actually showing our responsibilities and how well we do things compared to what happened over there. So I take my hat off to you and your team that we are very professional, and we are enlightened, and we show councillors and staff how well we can do these things. So I highly, what Warren just said, Councillor Marr, I take my hat off that we are really well in this area, and thanks very much for your input. Cheers.
Thank you.
Nice. Any other comments from councillors? Any other questions? Got a mover in Councillor Marr, a second in Councillor Cookson. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now move to item 7.2. This is on page 88 of your agenda. This is in relation to the Combined Co-Governance Committee and Co-Management Combined Joint Working Group, Waikato, WAIPA, and Nauai o Maniapoto River Catchments Freshwater Policy Review. And we have Tracy May and Bruce McAuliffe.
Kia ora, good morning, Madam Chair and councillors. I think I got the higher chair, Bruce, sitting on the floor there. Before we start, I would like to just introduce the folk behind me, and I apologise for my back. We have Antoine Coffin, our Chief Executive of the Waikato River Authority, and next to Antoine, Justine Young, Senior Policy Advisor. Some people in the room may know Justine, who used to work for us for many years, a few years ago. And to my right, behind me, if you can see behind me, is Billy Bruff. He is the River Iwi Technical Advisor. Billy was the River Iwi Technical Advisor through the entire Plan Change 1 process and has come on board to help Iwi with this process. And Billy's key role was facilitating our 5 River Iwi partners, and Billy's been pretty instrumental in the last 6 months to work with staff to get things up and running. So just wanted to acknowledge the folk who have come here today. Councillors, the report is pretty straightforward in front of you. I've got Bruce here who'll help me with any of the key technical matters. We had a workshop end of October, very beginning of November, that we took members through this process. At that workshop, we highlighted our statutory requirements. We also highlighted that the work of the committee this triennium, and it's very important to note that it is for this triennium. So it's really, the main role will be the formation of the co-governance arrangements to fulfil our JMA requirements in regard to the plan change development, and also to convene the joint working party that will ultimately discuss the process to be adopted for the preparation, review and plan change, engagement and participation processes with our river settlement iwi. And as we mentioned at the workshop, that is in addition to our local government and RMA requirements. They are our requirements that we've worked with our iwi partners with since 2011, and also the general form and content of the document. So those are the kinds of things that we are hoping to take to the committee in the new year. We are looking at a first meeting of the committee in March, and that will give sufficient time for our river iwi partners to have had conversations through their trust boards and be ready to bring their appointees to the first meeting. That's it, Madam Chair, from us.
I have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tracy and Bruce, for your work on this. I'd like to move this motion and suggest some names for nomination within number 3.
Madam Chair, if I can just apologise, that was probably something that we omitted, even though the recommendation had been through about 4 or 5 sets of eyes to actually state that we would be looking for the five nominations of councillors for the committee.
Yep, so Councillor
sorry.
Downard, Councillor Kneebone, Deputy Chair of Council, Councillor Clarkson, Councillor Smith, and Councillor Cookson.
Thank you for that, Councillor Strange. Councillor Hodge, did you?
I just wanted a question around recommendations and some wording, and that's all. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
So Tracy, thank you for this. As you know, there's been discrepancies around the wording of co-governance within councils and outside councils, central. Wouldn't it be easier if this was called, say, shared committee or something? Because, you know, co-governance is not a word that's been accepted in the wider area. It's when we went to the Water Well Done, one of the things the council was against was that councils was that word co-governance. I just want to ensure that the wording's right. I mean, it's okay right now, but going into the future, that co-governance word was not accepted within the councils during Three Waters, during Water Well Done, during blah, blah, blah. So just something to consider, okay?
I don't.
Tracy?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that, Councillor Hodge. Co-governance and co-management are words that we've used for the last decade with our river iwi partners. For me, nothing has changed other than perhaps public appetite for those words. So they are words that we use because we believe that it clearly defines it is co-governance, it is a governance committee, and the management is reflective of the work that staff does. So the terms we use, I understand the palatability may have changed and visibility, but they're words that for us are very clear in terms of our statutory responsibilities, but that's over to council.
I've already seconded. Councillor Marr.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to throw another name in the mix, and that's Hamilton constituent councillor Chris Hughes. And then just a question around, obviously we're looking for 5 and we now have 6, what the process is around that.
Yeah. I just need a light on you.
Sorry,
Sorry.
I don't know how to repeat myself, but I made the point. Thank you. Sorry, it's point of order.
We do have a motion on the table, so.
I'd like to move an amendment to that motion. And I guess part of that is to get the answer around the voting format if there are 6 nominations. So I would like to.
Well, so the amendment that you're putting forward is what?
6th name, Councillor Chris Hughes.
Madam Chair, just a technical question, and I'll look to you, Tracy. The terms of reference in there, I think, refer to 5. So would that need a change to a terms of reference if this suggestion were to go forward?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, it would. So the terms of reference are 1 representative of each of our river iwi partners and equal numbers of representatives then from council. So it is recommended that it's 5-5. If there was to be an increase, then my recommendation would be that that is then referred back to the joint working party so that it's taken back to our river iwi partners and our legal advisors.
So, Councillor Marr, if you want to move an amendment, my suggestion is you take one of those out and substitute in Councillor Hughes, and that is your amendment.
Okay, so Councillor Hughes, Councillor Cookson, Councillor Downard, Councillor Kneebone, Councillor Smith.
Councillor Hart.
So I'm lost in this. So maybe we go 6 names and vote for 5?
No, we have a motion on the table
Yeah, no.
for 5 names.
Yeah.
We now have an amendment proposed for a different 5 names. So we will have to take the amendment first, if it gets a second. And we will vote on that. And then we will vote on, depending on whether it wins or loses or passes or.
I guess I'm just trying to make it a lot easier. You've got 6 names in a hat, vote for 5 and end of story. But hey,
we have a
if
motion.
amendment is the best way, then I'm all good because I refuse to accept 6, but I'm happy with 5 and I don't care how we get to 5. But I think putting 6 names in a hat and we vote for 1 each would be a much more simpler way than having an amendment and dropping a person because of. That's it.
Yeah. All right. Do I have a second for Councillor Marr's? Councillor Cookson.
Question.
Yes, Councillor Mahuta.
Is the 6th intended to be an alternate? Should anyone not be able to show?
Could have.
This question to the
terms of
councillor who
reference?
proposed it.
Madam Chair, if I can help perhaps with the alternate. So what we found last time when we went through the Plan Change 1 process is that we needed to have continuity. So our alternates are very important. We need the person really travelling through the process. So I just wanted to make that that observation. It's very important that you stick and you go to each of the meetings, one, to form the relationships that are very critical, two, then to do the work. But that again is over to council if they wish to appoint alternates.
Yeah, because I'd considered whether to be an alternate, was really interested, but at the same time looking at the names, they're all names that quite regularly turn up, show up. So I'm comfortable leaving it until we find that it's a problem. We can always bring it back to council to appoint an alternate later on, should we find it's an issue. And noting it is probably only going to meet once or twice, or, you know, not a huge number of times before the end of the training, and then we'll go through all this again for reconstituting.
Right. Councillor Marr?
Just a question, Tracy. Yesterday it was sort of articulated to us that there's probably only one meeting, but I see in our calendar there's placeholders for at least 3 before the end of the triennium.
Yeah.
So just
That,
for councillors' time, obviously.
Yep, through you, Madam Chair. It's always better to pop them in the meeting in the calendar as early as possible, particularly when we are coordinating, and it's the magic that Billy helps us with, coordinating with 5 River iwi trusts as well. So we have popped the 3 in there with advance notice that iwi have provided of their trust meetings. I would suggest it's 3 at a minimum at this stage.
All right, we have an amendment that has been moved and seconded, so we have to take that one first. So all those in favor of the amendment?
Okie dokie. What we will be voting on here by way of this division is the amendment that Chris Hughes be added as a member of the Co-Governance Committee, which would make the 5 members, if the motion amendment is successful: Councillor Downard, Councillor Kneebone, Councillor Hughes, Smith and Coxon. So I'll...
Can I get you to use your mic?
Point of order, that's not what we're hearing, because you've said be added, where in fact it says replacing Councillor Clarkson.
That's right. So Councillor Clarkson would not, if we get to a substantive motion, should the amendment be carried, Councillor Hughes would replace Councillor Clarkson in the way the original motion reads currently. So I'll call out your names in no particular order. Can you please use your mics and let me know if you support, oppose or abstain from the amendment? Councillor Hodge. Councillor Hughes. Councillor Kneebone.
Against.
Councillor Marr.
Support.
Councillor Mahuta. Councillor Nicol.
Against.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Story.
Against.
Councillor Strange.
Against.
Councillor Clarkson.
Against.
Councillor Cookson.
For.
Councillor Downard.
Support.
Councillor Dunbar Smith.
Support.
Councillor Graff.
Support. Support.
The amendment is lost. 8 votes to 6.
All right. So we will now put, do we call this a substantive motion?
Yep.
Right. We will now put the substantive motion. All those in favor?
Vision.
Okay, this one, a division has been called on the substantive motion, focusing on that the members of the committee representing council will be Councillor Downard, Kneebone, Clarkson, Smith and Cookson. Again, I'll call your names. Please use your mics and indicate if you support, oppose or abstain. Councillor Marr.
Oppose.
Councillor Mahuta. Councillor Nicol. Councillor Smith.
Support.
Councillor Story.
Support.
Councillor Strange.
Support.
Councillor Clarkson.
Support.
Councillor Cookson.
I'll abstain.
Councillor Downard,
Against.
Councillor Dunbar-Smith,
Oppose.
Councillor Graff,
Oppose.
Councillor Hodge, Councillor Hughes,
Oppose.
Councillor Kneebone.
Support.
The motion is carried 8 votes to 5 with 1 abstention.
All right. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Bruce.
Madam Chair, if I could just beg your indulgence. Yesterday at the Chief Executive's catch up with you, you were told that we didn't have a final date for the RM Amendment number 2 bill in terms of our submission. Our submissions close on the 10th of February, which is before strategy and policy. So we've already asked the Clerk of the House for a 3-day extension. If we're unable to get that 3-day extension, we will be scheduling in a submission subcommittee in early February. Just wanted to give you an update.
Great.
And I will leave you in Bruce's hands for the next item.
All right. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 7.3. This is on page 102 of your agenda. This is in relation to the Minister of Conservation approval of the proposed plan change to the Waikato Regional Coastal Plan. Bruce.
Good morning, councillors, Madam Chair. Just like to introduce you to Mariana Tatai, Senior Policy Advisor in my team, and she's helped prepare the paper. So this is Plan Change 2, which is a private plan change to the Waikato Regional Coastal Plan, which has introduced a new rule and amendment to a policy. And we just want to make, it's been through all the RMA Schedule 1 process, and we simply need to now advertise the operative date. We've already approved it. It's been to the Minister of Conservation, Honourable Tana Patata. He's approved it, and we just want to get your approval to notify an operative date, which we've recommended as I think it's 22nd of
January 2025.
So, yeah, so we've got everything in line to do that.
I've got Councillor Hughes, then Councillor Smith. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, thanks for the paper and presentation. When this was first workshopped, I asked that in the interests of safety for boat owners, that the outer extremities of the fish farm with moorings anchored, that there be clear lit buoys so that navigation is not carried out between the farm and the extremities of the anchors, so that because if somebody is fishing nearby, which is what's going to happen, and they drop an anchor on top of that, they're going to lose their anchor. It's a safety issue as far as fishing and also just common sense. And I don't see that in this diagram. Is it contemplated that those outer extremity anchors will be clearly marked at sea level?
Understand it probably would be, yeah, because up by the navigation bylaws would need to be, yes.
Because it's not shown on here, and I just want to make sure that we don't miss that.
Okay,
defer to my expert on the right here, but having fished out there and having seen people with anchors hooked around the mussel farms, then it is an issue.
Yeah, it's something we can run for you, councillor, and come back. Yeah.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Good report. Happy to move.
We've got a mover in Councillor Smith and a second in Councillor Kneebone. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And lovely to see you around the council table again. Kia ora. All right. We now move on to item 7.4. This is on page 108 of your agenda packs. This is in relation to the Port of TAHAROA Navigation Safety Function Request for Funding. And we have Director Sinclair with us. This paper.
Morning, councillors. I believe you're very familiar with the issue and familiar with the paper, so I won't recite what's in the paper to you already. I'll just give you a little bit of an update on one matter since the paper was written. As you'd anticipate, Chief Executive and myself are continuing to have conversations with Maritime New Zealand around the timing. They are positive conversations that would require some process at their end, but hopefully that will result in a slight extension to the 1st of July date through to a date closer towards the end of the next calendar year. That's not confirmed, but that being the case, that would give us obviously a number of additional months to be able to undertake the preparation works that would be necessary and to give the right guidance to yourselves. And hopefully that additional time would limit the amount of additional money that we would need to spend. I'm still requesting that funds be put aside as a fund that will be needed, but we'll do our very best to use as little of that as we can. But at this stage, as I mentioned the other day, until you really know what you don't know, you just need to have the contingency for that funding to be able to do this work well. With that, I'll take questions.
Any question? Oh, Councillor Smith.
Yes, I take on board a comment Councillor Hughes made last week during the budget discussions, in that those who a future expenditure should be paid for in future years. So that's, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but we're looking to take, or the recommendation is to take $100,000 from the 5.711 million, if I remember the figure correctly, surplus from last year, and put it towards doing what work, which we don't yet know what it is, to ensure this is in place. I'm really concerned that this shouldn't be financed from the prior year surplus. If it needs to be funded, it should be a reserve created and put against the operations of that port, if I can call it a port or a buoy. That pot of money is not something to just go dip into because it's there. We've yet to consider really in the fullness of consultation what that surplus is used for. And I think to grab this money without really putting some thought into it, and I'm happy to, if necessary, if there's support around the table, to move an amendment that a reserve is created and any expenditure is, is any income, future income, is put against that reserve to zero it out. So I'd like some discussion around that, please.
Madam Chair, if I could just clarify one thing that Councillor Smith said, and it's not to do with the suggestion of a reserve, it's to do with the need for consultation about the use of prior year surplus. My understanding from Janine in the past is that Council can make that decision without the need for consultation.
Madam Chair, discussion around whether it should come from prior year surplus or a reserve should be created and expenses recovered in a future year.
Who would like to speak to this?
If I can speak to, because seeing
Councillor
Councillor Smith raise the issue, I did raise the issue last couple of weeks ago. And just really following on from that, the terminology that Councillor Smith's using is probably not quite correct, but what I want to make sure is that all the costs that we incur from the time of first engagement, which has already happened, are being collected into a separate account, which is then charged against the operation that we'll be seeking to be, we have been asked to protect and to manage going forward, so that there's not a cost on the ratepayers. The cost is captured and levied back against the TAHAROA Sand Company or its operating trust. So that, I hope that's captured the intent. That's what I requested at the time. So I'm happy to move an amendment if that's necessary. to
Is
capture that.
yeah, I just want to make sure, first of all, Councillor Smith, would that address your?
That encapsulates it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that our wording of the motion reflects, you going to make another comment or? I just want to make sure the wording of this motion reflects the intent here, which is that we essentially are ring fencing, would that be the word? All the costs that are associated with this transfer of duties to us so that we can ensure we levy these against the commercial entity that is benefiting from the establishment of this.
So,
Brendan, if I could just make a comment first.
Sure.
So I absolutely understand the intent of that and support aspects of it, but I think Brent made the comment that we don't know what we don't know, and whether all of what we don't know can be put against a company or not, I'm not sure. For example, we must have a navigation safety bylaw in place. Well, fortunately, we've already got one. But we'll just need to check that it's appropriate for it. Now, of course, then there becomes whether there's public good factors involved. So we'd have to work through that process. But the intent, Brent, you might want to comment on of ring fencing things where it's clearly for a one user benefit.
Yeah,
Whether we'd be able to do that.
So absolutely, to answer your question, Councillor Hughes, ring fencing the costs associated with this is a simple exercise. The more difficult exercise is then to determine under what legislative power we have to recover elements of that. So council will be aware when it puts in place. It's not somebody transferring us their power, it's our function that we transferred and they are relinquishing that transfer. So this is a function of this council. And so the question then becomes the establishment costs for undertaking a function versus the ongoing operational costs. So as Councillor Smith said, future costs will sit with future users of us exercising our function. The question becomes the legal mechanism for charging somebody for delivering a function that is a requirement of the law for us to deliver. I can't give you advice today whether or not you have the ability, you have of recovering those costs. Absolutely, I committed to Councillor Smith to investigate what that opportunity is, to ring fence those costs and those costs that can be on-charged, to on-charge those costs.
Yeah. So I believe councillors are hearing you. What we want, the intent of this, what councillors are asking is that we are cognizant and have clearly identified all of the expenditure that this council will incur through this process, noting your comment that some of it may not be recoverable by law, but councillors are wanting to understand the full impact financially of this process.
Absolutely, and absolutely we'll report that back to council.
And so that's what I'm setting out to capture,
yeah,
and then worry about distributing the cost centres at a later time. But if we don't capture it, we can't deal with it.
Absolutely, and I believe that that is what is reflected in this motion.
So fundamentally, councillors, for me to go and engage somebody to do something, I have to have budget to do so. And so what this is identifying is the need for budget to be allocated to undertake the necessary works. In future, where there is an opportunity to recover those costs, we would look to recover them. But in the first instance, I need your authority to spend money, which that's.
Councillor Mahuta.
Thank you for the report to the councillors for being mindful of how we cover these costs. Wouldn't want this particular enterprise treated differently from anyone else around the country, but understand that we've got to establish this. Wondering what we can gain from partnering with Taranaki. They run ports. They've got this maritime stuff in play, not unlike how we manage part of the lower corner of Auckland's catchment needs. What could Taranaki do for us so we don't have to try and grow this third head? And or Tauranga, because we don't want Astrolab, right? They've done all the learning. bay. So I'm saying, what can the other regional councils do for us in the interim while we grow this capacity? Because I would hate for us to go and tick up a really highly spec team for a task that we haven't quantified. I know you're doing the quantification now.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are all the questions, Councillor Mahuta, that we ask and answer through this process. And whilst I can't confirm the additional time, I've got a very strong sense from Maritime New Zealand that the additional time can be made available to us to be able to undertake the exact things that you just described.
Councillor Kneebone, did you want to speak to this item or no? All good. Councillor Downard.
So are we comfortable just going back to Councillor Smith's comment that it's coming out of the last year's surplus and the amount? Because you did mention that now it's been extended to the end of 25 that you might not need it.
We won't spend any money that we don't need to spend, Councillor. It's just about right now not knowing exactly what will be involved. It's making provision to be able to spend up to this amount of money, and if we can do it in a far cheaper way, then we absolutely will be.
Mm-hmm. But I think what we are hearing is councillors want to be reported back to
Absolutely.
On this. Absolutely. So we recognize you need some budget allocation for this. Don't spend it if you don't need it. All right, so I've got a motion. Have I got a mover? Councillor. I need a mic on you there.
Happy to move, Madam Chair, but I want to ensure that we have precedent for doing this and for making charges against bodies subsequently. So it's not new, and I just want to make sure that the precedent that we've already established, where we're incurring costs upfront, future projects, that those costs be sheeted home to the beneficiaries of the expenditure at the end of the day. So, and I don't see that being encapsulated in that motion.
So then give us some wording.
Thanks.
So what we've got there is the staff investigate the possibility of these safety function expenses being ring fenced and paid for by the port user.
Okay.
Yes, Councillor Kneebone?
That staff acknowledge the concerns of council and look to avenues for these safety function expenses being ring fenced and paid for by the user. Avenues or
yeah, I'm happy to move that.
Methodologies or something.
I'll second it, Madam Chair.
I think it's
the intent. So yeah, the intent that's what's important.
So in other words, they're going to come back to us and show us the most efficient way to do that. Yeah.
Madam Chair.
All right, so I've got a mover in Councillor Hughes, yes, and a second in Councillor Smith.
Thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, we will now move to item 7.5. This is on page 112 of your agenda. Investing to protect the Waikato region from the further spread of invasive freshwater clam. I'm skipping the Latin today. We've got Director Ryan, but first I'll go to our Chief Executive for a comment.
Yeah, CORBICULA FLUMINEA.
Nice.
So we've had some discussion about this since the paper was first presented to council, the business case, and we've had discussion about the fact that it was a controlled area notice plus option that was being recommended to council. That is still the case, but we've done a lot of work. There's various people involved in putting this together to outline what that involves and why, and hopefully that with some of the information that might be able to get presented, it will answer some of the questions that you've been asking of us. But anyway, Greg's put his hand up to bring this back because other staff on leave, and we've got other staff who will try and assist the discussion.
Yeah.
Greg.
Morena Koto. Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors. So the purpose of this item is to really bring attention to the capital investment that has been identified as necessary for us to meet the requirements of the controlled area notice and unwanted organism status of freshwater golden clams, Corbicula FLUMINEA. And I am joined by Darren Embling, our biosecurity team leader for pest plants, as well as Ed Brown, our manager environmental monitoring, to provide a bit more of an operational context to assist councillors with this discussion. I put this first slide up just to reinforce that this is about part one, which is the capital requirement that we immediately need to help our staff to meet those requirements and reduce the risk of spread. And just acknowledging that there is a second part to this business case, which will be traversed as part of the annual planning process. So just a bit of a reminder of the background and context, what we're dealing with here. So May 2023, so more than a year ago, Corbicula was discovered in the Waikato River in Lake KARAKIA at Bob's Landing, and since then has been confirmed over a stretch of the Waikato River from Lake Maraetai effectively down to Port Waikato. We're still in the response phase at the moment, and Biosecurity New Zealand are the lead. We are needing to transition into a long-term management phase though with Corbicula. One of the challenges with this particular pest is that there are no examples overseas where eradication has been demonstrated, and so we're certainly in a position where we're needing to learn to live with it, and in particular focus on pathway management, and that's really what the focus of this paper is, around enabling our teams to do what we need to do to reduce that risk and meet the requirements under the Biosecurity Act. There are a couple of terms added there which were have been put in place by Biosecurity New Zealand to assist with the management and the movement of golden clams. Firstly, in August, it was declared an unwanted organism. And so what that means is that we have a general responsibility to knowingly shift this around the motu. So that's, I guess, an overarching requirement that's been on council since August 2023. That was supplemented by a controlled area notice that was put in place along the Waikato River in November, and that covers the main stem of the Waikato River only, so not the tributaries. There are other activities happening at the moment to help to manage this particular incursion. We have a lot of surveillance underway, including eDNA, to understand not only within the catchment but also outside of the catchment what the movement's looking like. And I think at the moment nothing else has been detected outside of the Waikato River catchment, which is really good to know. But certainly our regional partners are watching us very carefully, because this particular incursion could have quite significant consequences for our other pristine lakes and water bodies around the motu. In terms of the pathway management aspect, in particular check, clean, dry. This isn't a new concept. It's been around for a few years since. So what was the year? Didimo. Yeah. So you recall Didimo a few years back, and so this general concept has been around for a while. But what we have come to understand with this particular incursion is that those existing protocols aren't sufficient, and that additional protocols are necessary to make sure that we are effectively checking, cleaning and drying in particular equipment that comes into contact with Waikato River water. So since the unwanted organism status has been in place and the CAN has been in place, we've been responding to that as council. We have a number of our work programs that are impacted by this, that do come into contact with Waikato River, our biosecurity, environmental monitoring, river management and operational work programs. We have done some work whilst we have been gathering our requirements together to make sure that we are meeting the requirements of the unwanted organism status and controlled area notice, proactive planning, scheduling of work programs and making sure that we're careful about where we're doing that work, and also undertaking some bare minimum check, clean, dry requirements as well. Some work has been able to be deferred as well. For example, our river management work on the main stem has been pretty light recently because we're in the process of building our new river vessel. In saying that, we are only doing that bare minimum check, clean, dry, and that does leave a risk of non-compliance with the UO and CAN requirements. So that's really important for council. Some of the programs that we don't have the necessary flexibility and adaptability that they normally do. So, for example, with our spray programs, often our plant pests span a wide area and require movement across multiple water bodies. The situation that we have at the moment is where we need to focus either within the main stem of the Waikato River or outside, and it really does reduce the flexibility of those operational programs, even from day to day, and being able to move from a controlled area notice to an area that's not covered by that. As I said, the main channel program is currently pretty light, but it will be ramping up shortly with the vessel being delivered, so we can expect increased requirements to come through within the year. And some work that we have been able to defer, that can't be deferred forever, and so we do need to pick that up. And one other element is around our flood event requirements. At the moment, we have a number of flood control outlets in the main stem of the Waikato River, and we've been able to maintain our inspections now with relatively low water levels. That's not always the case, as we all know, and especially during flood events when the pace of work picks up and the need to traverse different water bodies within a very short space of time becomes critical. So why is the investment needed? We need to be an exemplar in this space, quite frankly, to show that we are doing everything that we should be doing to manage the movement of Corbicula to other water bodies. I think I had a number this morning where our environmental monitoring program traverses the 110 water bodies in the region. That is significant, and so we need to do everything that is expected of us as council. We have a significant leadership responsibility in the region. We have a partnership with River Iwi in terms of implementing Te Ture Whaimana and Te Kaupapa Katiaki as well for Lake Taupo. So some very significant expectations are placed on this council to be the exemplar in this space. We need to meet those enhanced check, clean, dry requirements, and as I said, they are more than what has been required previously through other incursions such as Dirimo. We need to make sure that we're reducing the risk of spread through our normal operational activities, and ultimately to enable us to undertake our work programs to manage a number of strategic risks, which is the ultimate driver for these work programs. And that might be to do with infrastructure, biosecurity, or an environmental monitoring program. So with a focus on part one, it really is on providing additional gear and equipment for those teams that come into regular contact with the Waikato River and need to travel and traverse different catchments. And I understand there's been certainly a desire to understand some more detail around the funding request that has been sought, which is 414,000 from the prior year surplus. So I've got a bit more information here to assist. This is a breakdown of the request for 414,000, which has been brought together from the coalface. So we've basically connected our teams that are delivering work programs within the Waikato River catchment to understand what those check, clean, dry requirements are, particularly stand down times for gear, and therefore taking into account the type of work that's required, what additional equipment would be required. So you can see there it's a mixture of gear, equipment and vehicles. Gear is very much in the PPE space, so whether it's waders, personal protective wear, so PFDs, even boots, gum boots, basically anything that would come into contact with water. We have a range of equipment that we use to do our mahi in the river as well, so it's important that we have a depth of provision to enable stand down times for that equipment so that it does meet check, clean, dry requirements. And you can see that also with all this additional equipment, we also need a couple of additional vehicles as well to enable that. A bit more of a detailed breakdown across our teams. So you can see here, these are the different teams that will need to be adopting these protocols and meeting these requirements. And so you can see here a breakdown of the different capital requests through those teams, and also the staff numbers involved with those various teams. So we're looking at just over 50 people involved in different functions for council. So, Madam Chair, that's a rundown and hopefully a little bit more detail for councillors to consider this request. As I said, it's really critical for us to do what is expected of us. We are certainly not expected to do the bare minimum. We're expected to be an exemplar in this space, given our function that we have in biosecurity and also our critical stakeholder and iwi partnerships in the region. So I'm happy to pause there and open for questions.
All right, I've got a speaking order of Councillor Mahuta, Councillor Downard, and then Councillor Kneebone. Councillor Mahuta.
Firstly, a few comments, but again, I support the direction and would move the recommendations. But not our fault, but it's gone from MPI to transition to us. And I think the community with the most concerns were ineffectively engaged. What are we doing to do that better? As we build everybody's responsiveness, because when we were out in Huntly the other week, even the energy companies want to know, even though it's not in Huntly, you know, the net impact over time. And so between them and the fresh water needs, I'm saying we've got all these partners. I know they're not named specifically, but it's in their interest to stay with us through the life of this project. And I just wonder if everyone's just going to quote some other councillors, take a free ride on us otherwise, when they should be fronting. I see the case for research. They should be fronting a lot of that for us, and we should be coming in behind it, in my opinion. So I just want to really get behind this, but say that once it's gone from something that they've notified and it's here now. So this time last year, everyone was in a room, in a war room, huddling around. They had all the information available. Now it feels like they don't. And I'm saying, well, we've transitioned. How do we take the rest of the community with us? And how do we take them with us in a way that whatever influence they can have on the sector comes into the project too? Otherwise, we're just, again, it's probably more that that kind of advocacy I'm talking about. I know the work on the ground that needs to be done. So therefore, if this is the case, then I would expect that kaitiaki who are in those same places as us can be highly funded from applying to our funds to do the work that they're already doing in the same catchments. And I don't see that. So yes, they could apply to the EIF or the other funds, but they're out there anyway. So how are we protecting kaitiaki activity along the river? Or how will this help enhance it? What can iwi do in partnership? But back to you, Greg. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's actually a good point to highlight is that I guess we have a couple of roles here as council. One is in the biosecurity system. So we're a key partnership with other players in the biosecurity system, including our iwi partners. The focus of this particular paper today is more about our operational work. So it's not necessarily the work that's required or the plan required to transition to long-term management. This is simply about our operational activities and making sure that they meet the requirements of this unwanted organism and the controlled area notice. In terms of our partnership with our iwi and stakeholders in the region, I think it's fair to say there's been a lot of learnings out of the response. And we have recently adopted a memorandum of understanding between ourselves, Biosecurity New Zealand and Department of Conservation in terms of how we work together and how we can work better together. A critical part to that is the fact that we have some really strong relationships at a regional level, and we need to make sure that we leverage those existing relationships to make sure we have a much more effective response.
And just noting, as we mentioned yesterday, we have, as a council, received a formal letter from the chair of Northland Regional Council, just highlighting their expectations on our council to lead the protection of the rest of the country against this onslaught.
Total group, but don't forget, iwi aren't just in the policy, they're in the river too.
Yes.
And I don't know whether they can afford the same equipment cleans. I'm just looking for funding if they apply for a similar purpose because they're in the river doing kaitiakitanga, that we will look at the same.
Well, I can take that question. I don't have a specific answer for that today, but I can take that question away. Councillor, thank you.
I've got Councillor Downard, Kneebone, Dunbar, Smith, and Hughes. Councillor Downard.
I concur with Councillor Mahuta, what she said, but my big concern is this is the second item that's, taking out of the past year's surplus out of ratepayers. And for my ratepayers and actually the whole region ratepayers, my big concern is that you know, we've already, through the annual plan consultation, there's money being asked for, you know, for the OPEX rather than the CAPEX that's been asked for today. I believe that the past surplus should be going back to the ratepayers that we've taken off and we haven't used. So, you know, to me, asking for extra money out of surplus, I do believe we have a key role in this. But I also believe that, you know, it's shifting from MPI to us and to a great extent. And just the numbers there, Greg, I just, you know, 84,000 for, you know, wetsuits and life jackets. The numbers just don't, you know, add up to me. It's just real expensive, you know, that whole 414,000. So my biggest concern is that, you know, I believe that we're putting a lot more on the ratepayers than we should. You know, we've got NIWA in the report. We've got NIWA getting 10 million over the next 5 years for research to combat that. And I'm sure there's other entities that both iwi and MPI are putting into it. I just think, you know, for that amount of money, we're jumping in a little bit too soon. You know, this has been in the rivers now for 16 months in between Lake Maraita and Port Waikato. Has it shifted anywhere in that 16 months? You know, for the ongoing wash, I think MPI put on 15 wash stations and stuff like that in the community. So, yeah, I'm just real concerned that we might be taking on too much out of a surplus that I believe that should be going back to the ratepayers.
Yeah, and look, so to provide a bit more insight into where these numbers, how these numbers have been derived, particularly in the gear space, the largest challenge that we see operationally is that gear needs to be stood down for a period of time before going from within the Waikato River out to other parts of the region. And so what that has necessitated is for us to have a much greater depth of gear, and whether it's personal protective gear. It's also about standing down potentially contractors for a period of time to enable that check, clean, dry protocol to be followed before we have machinery, equipment or protective gear moving outside of the area. So that's really the basis for those numbers there. And you can see the number of staff, which hopefully gives councillors an idea of the scale of the challenge that we have. And I would, I guess, just reinforce the separate conversation that we do need to have around long-term management of Corbicula. There'll certainly be a conversation for council to have in terms of understanding what our ongoing role in that looks like, because it will certainly be a partnership across multiple organisations, and that is something that's been worked through at the moment.
Just, you know, in relation to what Councillor Downard has raised around concerns about funding this from the prior year surplus. If we were to, given the expectation of our regional sector peers, given the expectation of our iwi partners and our broader community that we do everything we can, if we were to not fund this out of prior year surplus, how could we fund it? Want to respond to that, Chris?
Madam Chair, I'll have first crack at it anyway. The options would be we'd need to try and fund it out of this year's money. Given I don't think that I can't recall what the Q1 forecast was, and probably went through the agenda earlier on, looking at the chair, that, you know, so that either have to reforecast this year, or if it can't be, we'd have to run a different outcome, what we'd propose to. The other option would be that we ring fence the money and put it into the annual plan discussions next year. But I think that the advice that we've had from our Director of Finance and Business Services in the past has been, this is the type of thing, a one-off expense that is appropriate to be funded from a prior year surplus.
So if it's to be funded now, it has to be funded out of either the prior year surplus or a change to the forecast, or we don't do the work now and we fund it next year and we don't bridge this gap. of the expectations our community has on us. I just want to make sure everybody is clear on the implications. Sorry, did you?
Wait for me to respond to the Chief Executive, but just to give an update to people, at the end of September was our last report, and Council is tracking ahead of forecast in terms of its surplus. So that might put your mind at rest on that. As the Chief Executive, and Janine was planning on doing a reforecast, so we don't have the surprises that came at us last year. So that process will be happening when Janine returns from holiday.
All right, but I just want councillors to understand that if this is work that we believe we need to undertake, we need to fund it somehow. All right, I've got Councillor Kneebone.
So in terms of the funding issue, my view's really simple. It's always ratepayers' money, no matter how we fund it. The only other way to fund this is that we decide in the next annual plan to create a biosecurity reserve for events like this that we might go for 10 years without it happening. And I know what's going to happen within 3 years. Everyone will go, no, this reserve's not getting used. Let's stop it. Want to keep rates down. That's the reality of it. And I've seen that happen time and time again, you know. I would dearly love to give Darren a reserve to work with, but I know now that the rest of this table won't support it because of the amount of time we might go for before we need it. You know, it's effectively create an insurance fund. If there's support to do it, I'd be really keen to do it because this biosecurity issue, whether it's marine, freshwater or terrestrial, it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Let's be honest, you know. And so, but again, Michaela, I make the point, whether we create a specific reserve or use a surplus, it's still always ratepayers' money. And I think the ratepayers will not forgive us if we allow this, if we go slack on this and allow it to grow legs, and the rest of the country sure as hell won't forgive us. In terms of the expenditure itself, yeah, look, it is expensive. I acknowledge that. And I mean, geez, go down to Blim and Burns or something and outfit just one family with all the stuff you need to go boating, you'll get a shock, you know. And with that stand down period that Greg mentioned, I guess my only comment, Greg, would be make sure that we're buying in bulk, we're getting a blooming good deal. And the other thing is, I've sort of seen these broadly similar sort of projects, not in terms of biosecurity, when we buy a whole bunch of kit and then after 2 or 3 years the project's done its dash and then someone forgets about it and it all sits in the back of a blooming office somewhere. Just make sure we don't do that. So if the need for this kit doesn't exist in 2 or 3 years' time, we've got another outlet so it gets utilised, and that might be sharing it with another council. I don't know, but anyway, just I guess my main question though, Greg, watching what happened in the Bay of Plenty, and I understand they didn't have it there, so they put a lot more effort into making kind of effectively what we're doing now. And they had a lot of support from MPI to do that we didn't have here, as I understand it, because MPI had understandably decided that it was already here, so it was more of a containment rather than a preventing an incursion. Are we getting, or is any chance of getting any more support out of MPI in the way that Bay of Plenty did, or not?
So I think the support that MPI provided to Bay of Plenty was around the initial incursion. Right. The nature of the investment we're talking about here is actually the ongoing operational response to that over a number of years, as opposed to necessarily that initial response. So there was certainly a little bit more, I think, from memory in terms of washdown stations and things like that. Yeah. That's to help the public to understand the challenge and also do what they need to do and feel a bit more comfortable in terms of, for example, moving recreational vessels between waterways. This requirement here is very different. This is effectively, it's a requirement that's placed on council just like any other user of the river in terms of meeting those check, clean, dry requirements. Okay, no, yeah.
Just along the lines of what Councillor Kneebone has raised in terms of we spend ratepayer money to undertake additional work and as things come up. Can we ensure, along the lines of what we said about the Port of Taharoa, are we collecting the total dollars we are spending as a region in relation to fighting this new incursion, just in support of our narrative as part of the regional sector of the impact of any slowing down or retreating from protection of our borders of invasive species. I'd just like to make sure that we are collecting that information so it can form part of our feedback to central government on the cost of these types of responses. I've got Councillor Dunbar, Smith, Hughes, Clarkson, and Downard again, but you have already spoken. So I do want to get through this. Councillor Dunbar Smith.
Yes, I support what Councillor Downard has said in relation to the 414,000 that's suddenly been requested of us from last year's surplus. I mean, that's 0.4% rate decrease that could happen if it wasn't this. But my most concern is the paucity of information in the 34-page report. This information here is not contained in the report. There's been no breakdown in the report on the 414,000 or how it was arrived at. And today we find out the number of staff involved. So there's serious questions I've got about the report itself and the justification that was sitting in it. Firstly, are we meeting currently? So I note here on page 11, in respect to WRC water sampling, Biosecurity Act has set a number of conditions which allow us to carry on our current work. That's correct? Are we meeting those criteria?
So we have a number of programs that are having to respond to those criteria, and each of those programs have responded differently to meet them. So as I said, for our biosecurity work, we're having to adjust our work programs to be much less flexible and effective, and somewhat reduced to be able to meet that criteria. For a program such as environmental monitoring, we are doing the bare minimum requirements for check, clean, dry. But what's very clear is that we need to do more in that space to really demonstrate that we are an exemplar in terms of managing the shift of this species around water bodies. Other work has been able to be deferred, so we have been able to set it aside until we can have the resources necessary to meet those requirements. For example, our river work. So as I said, each program is different and has different arrangements in place to make sure what we're doing, but it's fair to say each program is somewhat compromised as well.
But however, at the moment, the environmental monitoring teams are currently utilising 2 sets of gear, some for in and out. So we're currently meeting criteria that MPI has set down.
So I've got Ed Brown here, who's also our manager of environmental monitoring, so just to provide some insight into what's happening with this particular program.
We are meeting it strictly to the requirement, and it is minimum as described. So when we go down the Waikato River, where the red line is for the can, if we sample from the Waikato River, we are meeting the requirements. But many of our monitoring sites could be on a tributary, and it may only be a short 50 metres up the tributary, and that's outside the can, but it's where staff are going in. And that water, in theory, is just as much at risk from the clams, but MPI has simply drawn a line on the river. So yes, we have 2 sets of gear which are helping us for when we only sample from the Waikato River, which is a small number of our sites. It's about a dozen sites out of our 110 that we visit each month. So
just clarify, there's 10 sites that we're currently in the Waikato River.
Approximately 10 on the main stem, and then we have 110 throughout the region that we just do on our water quality runs each month. So we are meeting the bare minimum because a red line was drawn just on the main stem of the river. But we actually monitor many other sites, which are, like I say, 50 metres up from the main stem. And MPI didn't draw the line on those. They took their approach. So that's the concept of the bare minimum. We're meeting what's written, but we know that we can be the vector for taking it elsewhere, because in each day we are going to a site, we're in it for 5 minutes, and then we're moving on to the next site, and at 5 minutes moving to the next site. So,
well, I mean, could you not do the other sites and have a dedicated team that just did the 10? I mean, can we go back the slide there? Oh no, I'm just saying that $196,000 is a lot of money for sampling equipment, et cetera, et cetera.
And so at the moment, as that report says, we're currently doing what you're describing, 2 sets of gear, and we are doing it appropriately for the 10 sites on the main stem of the Waikato River. We're not doing it appropriately for the nearby sites, which are on the tributaries. So that's where we need to step up, and that's what this funding's for.
Right. Okay. In terms of the $100,000 that was currently allocated in the long-term plan, it's mentioned in here, but there's no indication of what that's being spent on.
So that was a lift in our resourcing in the freshwater marine biosecurity space, and that really speaks to, I think I referred to earlier in the long-term management space. So this work here is purely around our operational requirements for doing our other work. The lift in the long-term plan was focusing on our freshwater biosecurity program across a number of incursions, across a number of species, and playing our part in the biosecurity system, not the operational delivery of our different programs that need to meet biosecurity requirements. If that makes sense.
No, it doesn't actually.
So our biosecurity program is engaged in the freshwater biosecurity space with our partners. CORBICULA is one of the things that we deal with. We have a role to play in terms of the management of a number of freshwater pests, and so the lift in resourcing for the long-term plan was to support that particular piece of work. What we're talking about today is simply our operational requirements from other parts of the business that need to meet these new biosecurity requirements.
And also in here, it talks about the need for staffing, that there's $75,000 currently being spent on staff or OPEX. There's no head count. So what is that being for under the current status quo, which is what we're doing now? What are we spending that money on?
So we have a staff member that is dedicated to the Check, Clean, Dry program, who's just started, and Gordon, isn't it? Yeah. So for example, Gordon's been working with other partners and stakeholders across the region to help them to understand the requirements in this particular space and meet those requirements. So one example was we had a recent boating event where craft were needing to shift from the Waikato River to the Waihapiako, and so there was a piece of work that was done that was led by Gordon to help those craft to be sufficiently cleaned and moved and shifted from one water body to another. So he's helping with the much broader work program and helping the much broader community to respond to this particular incursion, as well as other freshwater biosecurity pests.
So I note that in February, you're coming back for another $170,000 for someone to do similar work.
So this is around our internal needs and making sure that, number one, we have the right training in place, not only for our staff, but also our contractors, because much of this work does involve contractors across a range of disciplines. We also need to have confidence, I need to have confidence that we are doing everything that we should be doing in this space. So a big part of this is auditing and checking and making sure that what we expect to be in place is happening, so that we can be sure that we are doing what we need to do to reduce that risk.
Yeah, I would have assumed that that was part of the contract we had with contractors, that we required them to do that.
We have our own internal processes that we need to have assurance of as well. So, because this is new for contractors as well. I mean, this has been here for about 16 months. It is a new approach because you're talking about standing down of heavy equipment, for example. So we need to make sure that contractors understand those kind of needs and have the right, and are supported to have the right processes in place to meet those requirements.
I just want to signal, I think this has been a poor process in terms of the report that come through. And
so I recognize that councillors prior to today's meeting asked for a greater level of detail. That is what has been provided to council today. And I have indulged a bit of a deeper dive because I know councillors are interested in the detail on this. I'm sure that it is both a inquiry in terms of ensuring we're expending ratepayer dollars as efficiently and effectively as possible, but also meeting these expectations and requirements across the country and across our stakeholders, that we do everything we can to not be the bearer of this, making its way outside the Waikato region or in to Lake Taupo. All right. I want to move us through this, but there's a few that are keen to speak. So let's make it quick. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Without restating what you've already stated, I think we need to look at what's caused this deeper dive and hope that the senior staff that authored this report and others just reflect on why councillors have taken this deep dive and let's move on from that learning. However, going back, and I've had the opportunity in the last week or two to interrogate Greg a little bit more. And again, we did that this morning, Robbie and I.
Was there a bright light shining on you, Greg?
He's come out of it all right. He's not black and blue. But the reality is, you know, that sort of information should have been with us in that report, and we wouldn't have had this deep dive to the extent. So this is not about MPI. This is about the regional council complying with the law. And the law, regulations, notices, whatever, are requiring council to act in a certain way. And some of those, which Ed's just alluded to, is you to go 50 metres up realistically needs a land-based approach or another boat that is in clean water. And so that's why we've got all this expenditure. I'm not happy to see it. Long term, I'm not sure that we will contain this and it will just become another one of those ugly beasts, the Dirimo and others. So is this a waste of money? I don't know, but until we actually get to a point, we've got to do something, and that's comply with the law. So the reality is, in our governance role, now that we have sufficient understanding of what the business case is really about, we need to determine, is that the case been made out? If so, hand over the money and let staff get on with the job. It's not for us to continue to micromanage. And I'm not trying to be critical of my colleagues, and I respect why some have gone deeper. And Ben, I congratulate you on seeking those answers because they weren't there. So the reality is, Madam Chair, we need to fund this to do the right thing. It's not what I want to see, but it's a matter of being required to. So happy, regret, with some reluctance, but to recommend the move the motion.
We do have a mover already in Councillor Mahuta. Would you like to second?
I'll second that.
All right, so we have done a fair bit of deep diving. I'm going to go to the others who have wanted to make a comment, but please let's make it brief. Councillor Hughes.
Madam Chair, I'm appalled that we're spending this level of money on something which should be a very simple exercise. If you read the can, you can do it in 2 minutes. It's very clear, very explicit, and I don't believe that we are using our ratepayers' money wisely. I'm not happy with the calculations. We've got 2 vehicles on there. I don't see any changes to the OPEX because it costs money to run vehicles. So, and as far as I'm concerned, I don't know what we're testing for. We're not going to stop the spread of the clams by testing, or we're going to prove that they're there. Whoop-de-doo. What does that tell us? Nothing. As long as the notices are up, which I understand they are, all the way down the river, people have been warned about the infestation. They can read, and that's the level of our responsibility in accordance with the can. So,
just to clarify that.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. So in regard to the comment around testing, Councillor Hughes, we are not anticipating doing any further monitoring in our environmental monitoring program. It is just a consequence of the program that is in the river at the moment. There may be additional requirements for testing spread, but they come through from directives from MPI. So we're not, just want to be very clear from an environmental monitoring perspective, we're not adding additional sites. It is the requirement of the CAN and the unwanted organism declaration that would necessitate any additional testing.
can I just respond to that, Madam Chair, please? The CAN is very clear in terms of what you do with, it's a very simple process to take equipment out of the water, wash it down beside the river, and then you can go and reuse it. doesn't require replacing the equipment.
All right, Councillor Marr, Councillor Clarkson. Councillor Marr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to correct something that Greg said. It is in this report, and I quote, "It is noted that some funding, 100K, was received through the 2024-34 long-term plan to assist WRC teams in ensuring compliance with CAN requirements. This funding is required to continue to manage the risks related to the spread of tuberculosis until a project is stood up in relation to this business case." So my understanding, the way I read that, it was the full 100,000. Sorry, yeah, I hadn't finished. I note the report was produced by Place Group, obviously independent contractors and that. Is there any avenue for them to be involved in some of this project management going forward?
So we do utilise Place Group for a number of areas. They're a general consultancy firm. They supported us in the RPMP, for example.
I just have concerns around the possibility of an organisation producing a report and then becoming a paid contractor in the implementation of that report.
Sure. What I can
Through you, Madam Chair, the report and the services were acquired through our procurement policy. If in fact there was any interests above and beyond any other contractor, then they would be tested pretty swiftly through the procurement policy. A lot of this, what is in there is a lot of operational work on the ground conducted through Ed's team, Darian's team, and the other teams here. Place Group does not do that operational work out in the field. So just for clarity.
Understanding that, but just looking at the 170,000 proposed for annually for the next 3 years, it's proposed to use external contractors, and a lot of that seems to be project management, from what I read in the report. Moving on to the in-depth, and I won't cover what everybody else has covered, but my concerns are the same. The CAN notice, and this is purely for our work in the CAN areas and the requirement not to transfer this organism into other waterways. Really simple treatments around absorbent materials, etc. Struggle to understand. Do those 52 staff work in the CAN area all the time? So at 10 sites with the monitoring staff?
So that they're across different programs. So for example,
so they're not always in the CAN area?
Not always in the, but they work in the CAN, and the challenge with the staff identified is that they not only work within the mainstem of the Waikato River, but through other water bodies as well.
Understand that.
The need for the additional equipment.
Understand that. And yeah, just reading the CAN notice, and I've read it again and again and again. I've spoken to John Walsh from Biosecurity New Zealand. It is the latest information out there that we are using. I just don't see the need for such capital expenditure going forward and the processes that are outlined in that CAN area. I'll leave it there. I don't want to dive any deeper.
Thank you. We'll have a last speaker in Councillor Clarkson.
I will try and keep it as brief as possible, but there are a couple of points I did want to make. First of all, I wanted to pick up on the comment made by Stu about biosecurity budgets. And from my perspective, looking outside of the organisation, it is imperative in a biosecurity budget that there is money set aside somewhere, contingencies like the one that we're facing with the CLAM. I mean, this is going to keep happening again and again and again with a whole range of new organisms. And so I think we need some flexibility in our thinking and in the way we budget for issues like this. So I'd like to follow up that at some stage with Stu and others to see how we might do something about that. I think we're going to have to do it. I also think we have to be extremely realistic about expectations of us as a regional leader in the environmental space. And actually it's about the TLAs and iwi and everybody, because, and Mikhail, while I understand your concern, we surely must be doing absolutely everything to prevent the CLAM getting into Lake Taupo. And it's not just Lake Taupo, as we've been listening to Ed, it's every other water body in the Waikato region. And yes, you can stop it if you get it quick. And I am concerned to hear in the debate that essentially what we are doing here is covering our own backside in terms of our own work to make sure we are not the people distributing it more widely across the region. I'm concerned about insufficient funding going to wider surveillance.
I want to leave us with that thought, really. So yes, I will support this, but I did have the same concerns about the lack of detail in the report. And like you, Mikhail, I look at some of these figures, and I am not an expert in this space, but the figures do worry me. But I think we have to, at some point in our governance role, let go, and the operational side, I'm just going to have to trust that these guys are going to get out there and get the very best deal for everything they purchase, that equipment is used wisely and efficiently, and that there is a consideration of how vehicle use in a vehicle pool is appropriately managed. So, you know, do we really need 2 new vehicles or whatever? At some point, we have to let go on that. We are governance, and that is operations. So thank you.
I am sure that staff have heard loud and clear from this council about the level of detail and the quality of the information that is put before us when asking us to make these types of decisions. I am sure that everyone in this room has heard that loud and clear and will take note of it for future reports that may come before this council.
Madam Chair, may I
All right,
speak?
I have a mover and a seconder.
May I speak, Madam Chair?
You have already spoken on this. Is
I
there
didn't realise that we're only allowed to speak once on each
a
agenda.
very quick comment?
lot of
A
other
very quick
councillors
comment.
speak
Thank you,
5
Councillor Downard.
times, Madam
A
Chair.
very quick comment. Thank you.
It's not a very quick comment. I'm commenting back on Councillor Clarkson. And
Feel
I do
free to make the
believe,
comment.
You know, I respect his knowledge and stuff on that, and I don't want it in Lake Taupo. But when you look at the data and the scientific evidence to give to us to give out virtually $1 million on surplus ratepayers' money, including the annual plan, we haven't had any data or scientific to
$1
say
million?
that it's threatening local ecosystems or fisheries. We haven't got any data on whether it's contributing to accumulation of contaminants in the water, which would, you know, if I had that data over the 16 months to say, hey, it is becoming more dangerous and needs to be addressed with more funding, then I'd tick this and say that. But we haven't had this whole thing has kind of come out at us, and we have, Councillor Smith, we've complied to the legal. It might be minimum, but we have complied to the legal legislation on our ability to do this. So I'm going to ask for division, and this is why I'm asking for division, because I don't believe this money has been thought out properly. It's surplus money out of past ratepayers, so I'll be asking for division on this.
From the Chief Executive?
Yeah, apologies, councillors, I had to miss part of that discussion. I'll make my comment very simple. This is staff advice. It's up to you to make a decision what you want to do with it, but this is the advice staff are giving you.
All right, we have a mover and a seconder.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question on the motion
Yes.
in front of us? Is the 170,000 for 3 years per annum for 3 years critical to the 410? Is it? I can't.
Noting that this motion is not approving that expenditure.
No, I understand that, but if in the annual plan we didn't run with that 170, is that detrimental to the fact that we're buying all this equipment? I mean, we are noting it, so we're actually acknowledging the fact that there is going to be more funding requests coming to us.
So thanks, team. So it's the request is if they spend this money now or a portion of it, and it wasn't approved, and at the annual plan discussion, the 170K OPEX ongoing isn't approved. Has that been money down the drain, unwisely spent? I think that's the question.
Yeah, and ends up gear sitting on the shelves.
So no, because we have these requirements on us currently in terms of operating with the unwanted organism status and the CAN, and so that gear is required now to do our work to meet those required standards. The additional 170K a year is around additional measures to give us assurance that we're doing what we need to do. Things around making sure that we're offering training to our contractors, undertaking assurance measures to make sure that protocols that are in place are being given effect to. But effectively, the equipment will still be used and will still be necessary.
Thank you for the clarity.
All right, we have a mover and a seconder. A division has been called. I am going to put this motion. Yes.
The motion is on the screen. I'll call out your name shortly, whether you support or oppose or abstain. Please use your mics and here we go. Councillor Strange.
Support.
Councillor Clarkson.
Support.
Councillor Cookson.
Oppose.
Councillor Downard.
Oppose.
Councillor Dunbar Smith.
Abstain.
Councillor Graff.
Opposed?
Councillor Hodge. Support.
Support.
Councillor Hughes.
Oppose?
Councillor Kneebone.
Yeah, support.
Councillor Ma.
Oppose.
Councillor Mahuta. Councillor Nicol.
Support.
Councillor Smith.
Support.
Councillor Story.
Support.
The motion is carried 8 votes to 5 with 1 abstention.
All right, thank you very much for that. Councillors, we will take a 5-minute break. Now it is 11:12. We'll adjourn the meeting. Please come back at, let's make it 11:20. Next.